Not through the usual diplomatic relay. Not snorts through the United Earth. Concil's encrypted terminal, not even. Through the emergency frequency that had only been used twice in 40 years, both times for things nobody wanted to remember. It came through everything, every frequency, every band, every channel humanity had ever opened to the stars. Personal communicators, weather satellites, the old deep space array that was supposed to be decommissioned 3 years ago and just kept running because nobody wanted to file the paperwork, all of it at once, carrying the same 11 words translated into every human language simultaneously. The Galactic Council requests the presence of humanity's representative delegation. I read it on my tablet over a cup of bad coffee in my office on deck 4 of Earth's diplomatic station, Meridian 1. I read it twice. Then I put the tablet down, finished the coffee, and pulled up the historical archive, specifically the index entry for the last species that had received a formal request from the full Galactic Council. The Vreth. I had to search 3 databases to find anything substantial about them. Most records were thin, fragments translated, summaries of translated summaries. What I could piece together was that the Vreth had been a civilization of considerable age, considerable intelligence, and considerable presence in the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy. The entry ended with a single line under the heading marked status extinct, circumstances unrecorded. I closed the file, opened a new one, began drafting the crew manifest for the fastest ship in our diplomatic fleet. My name is Owen Calloway. I am 44 years old. I have spent 19 of those years as Earth's senior diplomatic liaison to the Galactic Council, which is a title that sounds impressive and mostly involves sitting in rooms where everyone is politely pretending humans belong there. I am not a soldier. I am not a scientist. I am a man who is reasonably good at reading a room and stubborn enough not to leave it when things get uncomfortable. When Director Lin called me 17 minutes after the message arrived, she did not say hello. She said, "You saw it." I saw it, I said. The Council has never called a full session for a single species before. I know. Not in recorded galactic history, not once, Owen. I know, Director. A pause long enough that I checked to make sure the line was still connected. "Come back alive," she said, and ended the call. I packed one bag, called my brother, got his voicemail, left a message that said I was going on a trip and would be back soon, which was either a lie or the truth, and I genuinely did not know which. Boarded the ship Clarion's Edge at 600 the following morning. Our crew was small, 6 people. Lieutenant Dana Vass handling navigation, Dr. Patrick O'Connell, Xenolinguistics, Ambassador Cora Fielding, who was 71 years old and had been in diplomatic service longer than I had been alive, and who arrived at the dock carrying a single hard case and a thermos of what she called real tea. 2 security officers named Cole and Priya, both of whom had the particular quality of stillness that comes from people trained to wait without showing that they are waiting. And our ship's liaison with Council Space, an AI named Myra that communicated through a small speaker clipped to the bridge console and had the conversational warmth of a very patient librarian. What I did not expect was the escort. As Clarion's Edge cleared Earth's outer marker and prepared to make the first Transit jump, Myra flagged an incoming. Vessel, Kethani configuration, single. Pilot. The Kethani were among the oldest spacefaring species in the Council. They had been traveling the stars when humans were still debating whether the sun moved around the Earth. Their ships were long, almost architectural in shape, built for journeys measured in centuries rather than weeks. This one pulled alongside us without being hailed. A voice came through the comms, old, textured in the way very old things are. Textured the way stone that has been in water a long time feels different from stone that has not. I am Ethu, the voice said. I will guide you. I leaned toward the comm panel. We weren't told to expect an escort. No, Ethu agreed as though that settled the question. I looked at Cora. She tilted her head slightly in the way that meant she had an opinion but was choosing not to share it yet. I looked at Dana. Dana shrugged with her eyes. Thank you, Ethu, I said. We'll follow your lead. He said nothing more. His ship moved ahead of ours. We followed. For 3 days, we traveled in formation. Patrick spent most of the journey in the archive bay, pulling every record he could find on the Council's full session procedures. Dana ran 17 different calculations on the route Ethu was taking, which was not the most direct path, but wasn't one she could find any reason to question. Cole and Priya rotated shifts with the mechanical precision of people who had decided to be useful because being worried was a luxury nobody had time for. Cora drank her tea and read. On the 3rd day, I went to find Ethu on the comm. How long have you been a pilot? I asked. A pause, not hesitation, consideration. 312 years, he said. I retired 11 years ago. But you took this assignment. I volunteered for it, he said. Why? The comm was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then very quietly, in the particular way that something is said when it is not meant to be a comfort but is being offered as one anyway. I wanted to see you before. I waited. He did not finish the sentence. I stood there at the comm panel for a moment, looking at the stars outside the forward viewport. They looked the same as they always did, cold and old and indifferent. The same stars that had looked down at every civilization that had ever risen and fallen in this galaxy, going all the way back to whatever came first before anyone was counting. Before what? I said. But Ethu had already closed the channel. I went back to my bunk, lay down, did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, Myra's voice came through my cabin speaker, quiet and precise. We are approaching Council space. Delegate Calloway, I should note that there are currently 47 registered diplomatic vessels in holding patterns outside the station. All of them received the same summons window. None of them have entered yet. I sat up there waiting. They appear to be, Myra said, waiting for us. I got dressed, went to the bridge. Through the forward viewport I could see them. 47 ships from 47 species, some of them among the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, all of them drifting in the dark outside the Council station. Something that was not a traffic delay and was not a formation. It was more like an audience. Every one of them was pointed toward the station entrance. Every one of them was completely still. And as Clarion's edge moved through that corridor of silent ships toward the dock, not a single one of them transmitted a greeting, a warning, or a word. The silence pressed against the viewport, like something with weight. Myra spoke one more time before we docked. "Delegate," she said, "I have completed a routine cross-reference of our diplomatic status in the Council registry. I want you to be aware of the result before we disembark. Go ahead. Every species registered with the Council carries a formal threat classification, containment protocols, behavioral projections, historical analysis. The files range from a few hundred pages to several million. And hours. A pause that a very patient librarian would give. Humanity's file contains one word under status, Myra said, unclassified. I looked out at the station, at the docking arm extending toward us, at the 47 ships behind us, and the silence around all of it. Not low threat, I said. No, Myra said, not low threat, not benign, not monitored, not pending. Unclassified, as though the category does not yet exist. The dock locked, the airlock opened. I picked up my bag and walked toward whatever was waiting for us on the other side of a door that the entire galaxy had been holding its breath for us to open. The station was called the Conclave of Verath, and it was the kind of place that made a person feel the specific kind of small that has nothing to do with size. It was not small, it was enormous. It had been built over a of 600 years by 18 different species, each adding their own section, their own architecture, their own materials and geometries, so that walking through it was like walking through 600 years of alien history all at once, without a map or a guide, and with the growing suspicion that the map would not have helped. Anyway, our assigned quarters were on level 12, section Amber, which Myra translated as meaning something approximately equal to the phrase guest corridor, though she noted the translation lost some nuance. I did not ask what nuance. Patrick was already deep in his work. Before we had finished unpacking his tablet covered in notation, several physical reference books open on the desk in a configuration that suggested he had already given up on keeping them organized. He had the look of a man trying to read the last chapter of a book that had been written in a language he had not quite finished learning. The Vreth reference keeps coming up, he said, not looking up. I know, I said. Not just in the summons historical context, in the general cultural memory of maybe 30 or 40 species here. When I pull Council archive footage of previous sessions, there are species present in those recordings that no longer exist. The Vreth, the Hasakam, the Anthari collective, all of them received full Council sessions. He looked up. None of them are here anymore. That's not evidence of anything, Cora said from the doorway. She snorts was holding her thermos. She had changed into her formal diplomatic gray and looked, as she always did, like someone who had survived worse than this and found it mildly interesting. It's a pattern, Patrick said. A pattern is not a sentence, she said. Stop reading ahead. She went to find her tea things and left. Patrick staring at the ceiling and me staring at the door. The first session was not scheduled for another 18 hours. I should have slept. I went for a walk instead. The station's common areas were open to all delegations during the informal period before formal sessions began. I had expected it to feel like a diplomatic function, people grouping, small conversations, The careful social architecture of beings from very different worlds trying to find common ground long enough to be polite to each other. Instead, it felt like a waiting room before something no one wanted to name. Species I recognized from years of council work sat in clusters in their environmental sections, barely talking. A delegation of Thune, the galaxy's most meticulous record keepers, 3 of them, sitting in perfect stillness around a single document that none of them appeared to be reading. A group of Havari engineers who should, by all rights, have been examining the station's infrastructure with their characteristic, relentless curiosity, instead sitting with their long hands folded and their eyes on the middle distance. Nobody made eye contact with me. That was the part I noticed most. In 17 years of attending council functions, I had never walked through a common area without someone attempting to engage. The galaxy had opinions about humans. Too loud, too fast, too short-lived, too prone to naming things after themselves, too likely to turn a formal negotiation into a story they would tell later. But they engaged, they were curious, they argued, they pulled Patrick into linguistic debates that lasted 3 hours. They challenged Cora to games of strategic logic that she usually won. Now they looked at the walls, the floors, their own hands. I had almost made it back to our quarters when someone said my name. The voice came from an alcove near the water processing corridor, and it belonged to a being I had to look at twice to place, small, dense, almost as though built from material that had no interest in taking up more space than necessary. Species designation Haravan, which I knew mostly from their academic publications on extinct civilizations. She was sitting cross-legged on a floor cushion surrounded by holographic document frames, and she had been crying. The Haravan equivalent of crying. I want to be precise. It is not tears. It is a particular stillness that comes over the facial region and a change in the resonance of the vocalization, something between vibration and breath that their species produces when experiencing significant loss. I had read about it. I had never seen it. She had clearly been in that state for some time. I apologize, she said when she saw me. I did not intend for you to see this. No need to apologize, I said. She looked at me with an expression I could not fully read but recognized in its shape the way a person looks at someone they have been studying from a distance and are now unexpectedly standing in front of. I am a historian, she said. I specialize in civilizations that no longer exist. I have spent 40 years studying your species as an academic project. She paused. I completed my most recent review of your full historical record this morning. I waited. You did not know, she said. It was not a question. You genuinely did not know what you were. I opened my mouth, closed it, said, "What are we?" She looked at her documents, back at me. That is exactly the problem, she said. No one has a word for it. She turned back to her work. I stood there another moment, then walked back to my quarters, made the worst cup of coffee the replicator could produce, and sat at the small desk by the viewport, looking out at a galaxy that was holding its breath around me. I thought about calling my brother. Again, decided against it. Outside the viewport, another ship was arriving, then another. By morning, Myra told me there would be 2,000 species present for the session. 2,000 species who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years longer than humanity had existed, all gathering in one room. For us, I finished the coffee. It was terrible. I considered this for perhaps 30 seconds, longer than was rational. Then I opened my prep files and started reading. The council chamber was built for 2,048 delegations. It had last been filled to capacity 212. Years ago, Myra had retrieved the session record. She had not told me what that session had been about. I had not asked. When our delegation entered through the lower diplomatic access corridor, every seat was occupied. 2,000 species, some biological, some synthetic, some in environmental chambers that filtered the chamber's air, or gravity or light into something there. Physiology required. Some so ancient that the translator nodes in my ear registered their communication not as language but as something the system labeled with unusual honesty, pre-verbal conceptual transfer. Every one of them was already present. When we walked in, every one of them was already looking at the door, at us. I have been in rooms where I was not welcome, rooms where I was being judged, rooms where I was the least important person present, rooms where the outcome had already been decided, and my job was to stand in the right place while it was announced. This was different from all of those. This was 2,000 civilizations watching 4 humans walk through a door, and the silence was so complete and so specific that I could hear Cora's shoes on the floor and the faint hum of Patrick's tablet in standby mode, and my own heartbeat doing something embarrassing that I was very grateful no one could hear. We took our seats at the delegate platform. The chamber did not change. No one moved, no one spoke. Then the elder spoke. He was Velen. The Velen were among the 3 or 4 oldest species still biologically active in the galaxy, and their elder representative had held his council seat for longer than most human civilizations had existed. He was tall, pale in the way things that have not needed sunlight for a long time become pale, and he had 17 eyes arranged in a pattern that my brain kept trying to resolve into something symmetrical and kept failing to. His voice when he spoke had the quality of a sound that has been used so many times it has worn smooth. We welcome the human delegation, he said, and we acknowledge the unusual nature of this convening. He paused. There are no charges, he said. I had not realized I was holding my breath until the breath came out. Humanity has committed no violation of council law, the elder continued. No treaty has been broken, no boundary crossed, no declaration of aggression has been made or is being alleged. Patrick wrote something on his tablet and slid it toward me without looking. It said, "Then why are we here?" The elder folded his long hands together on the council surface. "You are here," he said, "because of what you are going to do." Complete silence. Not the held breath silence from before. This was different. This was the silence of 2,000 species who already knew what was coming and were watching us hear it. For the first time, the Council maintains 17 independent predictive modeling systems, the elder said. Each was developed separately over a period of approximately 400,000 years. They operate on different principles, different data sets, different theoretical frameworks. In the history of their operation, they have agreed completely on a projected outcome only. 9 times. He stopped. They have reached complete agreement. For the 10th time, he said, regarding humanity. Cora beside me set her thermos very carefully on the table in front of her. She did not open it, she just needed something to do with her hands. Within a period not exceeding 200 of your years, the elder said, humanity will make a decision. The models cannot identify the nature of the decision. They cannot identify the context. They cannot identify who among you will make it or whether you will make it, collectively or individually or entirely, by accident. Another pause. The chamber waited with him. What the models agree on without exception, without variance, is the outcome. Whatever this decision is, it will restructure the foundational systems of galactic civilization. Not incrementally, not partially, completely. I looked at the chamber, 2,000 faces, forms, visual organs, perception systems, all oriented toward our table, with an expression I was only now learning to read as a cross-species. Constant fear, not of something that had happened, fear of something that was going to happen and could not be stopped because it had not started yet and might not even be recognized when it did. The council does not know, the elder said, and his voice had something in it now that I had not heard in a voice that old before, whether this restructuring will be beneficial or catastrophic. The models cannot determine this either. They only know that it is coming and that it will come from you. Patrick's tablet vibrated. He looked at it. His face went very still. I turned to the elder and said the first thing that came into my mind, which was the practical thing, the human thing, the embarrassingly straightforward thing that apparently no species in 2000 seats had thought to say. What do you want us to do about it? The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any that had come before. It went on long enough that I began to wonder if the translator had failed. Then from somewhere in the upper tiers of the chamber, in a voice too low to belong to any species I could immediately identify, I heard 2 words, spoken not into the comm system, but to the delegate seated next to the speaker, in a language my translator had almost not caught. There it is. The elder looked at me with all 17 eyes. That, he said quietly, is precisely what we do not know how to answer. The session recessed for 6 hours. I walked out of the chamber and through 3 corridors without knowing where I was going, which meant I ended up on a maintenance balcony on the station's outer ring that overlooked the central atrium from above. The atrium was 700 ft across and full of the soft movement of 2,000 delegations, breaking into smaller groups, the murmur of dozens of languages moving through the translation relays like water through a filter. I sat on a bench that was clearly not designed for human anatomy and ate a protein bar from my jacket pocket. It was a nutrition bar, technically manufactured. Beige, tasted like the memory of food rather than food itself. I had been carrying it since we left Meridian 1, and this was the first moment I had remembered it existed. I ate it very slowly. I was on the second half when I heard footsteps that were not quite footsteps, more a series of weighted compressions on the floor, and turned to find the Haravan historian from the previous evening. She was carrying a small case that I recognized as the portable archive kind. the sort that held physical documents, too fragile for standard scanning. "May I sit?" she asked. "Please," I said. She sat at the far end of the bench, which was designed for something with more limbs than either of us, and left a gap between us that was slightly too large for conversation and slightly too small for solitude. "My name is Sevi," she said. "I should have introduced myself last night." "Owen," I said. "I know," she said. "Of course she did. You've been studying us for 40 years. I said. "Longer than that informally, 40 years. Of formal academic work." She opened the case on her lap. Inside were documents. Real ones, printed on material that had the age color of things that had been preserved through significant effort. "I want to show you something." She pulled out a single document. A photograph, actually, or the closest thing her archive contained to one visual record of a species I did not recognize. "The vreth," she said. I looked at the image. Tall beings, graceful from what the image preserved. Something in their posture that reminded me, without logic, of musicians. "They were not destroyed," Sevi said. "That entry you found, the one that says circumstances unrecorded, that is technically accurate and practically misleading. The vreth were not destroyed by an outside force. They found something, a discovery about the nature of the physical universe that was so large they could not carry it. The knowledge broke them from the inside. They asked the Council for help, and the Council spent 11 years in committee determining the correct procedural response." She paused. "By the time the committee reported," she said, "there were none of the vreth left to report to." I looked at the photograph. "We are not the vreth," I said. "No," she agreed, "you are not." Vreth flinched. She looked at me directly. "Every species that has come before a full council session and is no longer present in this galaxy had something in common. They were given knowledge they could not integrate, and they flinched. And humanity." She was quiet for a moment. "In 40 years of study," she said, "I have not found a single historical record of humanity as a collective flinching." I thought about that. "We do plenty of other things," I said. "Yes," she said, "you do, but you do not flinch, you panic, you argue, you overcorrect, you form committees, you make things worse trying to make them better, you occasionally make things better by accident while trying to do something else entirely, but you do not look away." She closed the case. "That is why the models cannot categorize you." Every predictive system in the Council was built on the foundational assumption that a species, when faced with something genuinely overwhelming, will eventually choose stability over change, will choose known over unknown, will choose survival in a recognizable form over transformation into something new. And we don't," I said. "You do not even seem to understand that. This is an option," she said. She stood, picked up her case. "I have been studying extinct civilizations for my entire career," she said. "I specialize in things that are gone. I came to this session expecting to add a new entry to that catalog." She looked at me. "I am no longer certain that is what I am here to record." She left. I sat with the second half of the protein bar and watched the atrium below, where 2,000 civilizations moved through the space like a slow river, and did not know what to do with what I had just been handed. Cora found me 20 minutes later. She had her thermos. She sat down without Ceremony poured a cup and handed it to me. I drank it real tea, nothing like the replicator the Cathani pilot wants to speak with you before the session reconvenes, she said. I know, I said, though I had not known. Until she said it, sometimes things are obvious before they are known. Ethu was in the docking corridor, in a small observation alcove that looked out at the berth where his ship sat, alongside ours. He was standing with his hands behind his back watching the ships. I stood beside him. 312 years, I said. 314 now, he said. I miscounted. Long time to fly. Long time to watch, he said. Flying is easy, watching is the hard part. We stood in silence for a moment. His people's silence was different from the station silence. It was a comfortable kind, the kind that did not need to be filled. 80,000 years ago, he said, my species stood where you are standing, not in this corridor, in the position you are in, a crossroads we did not understand, a prophecy none of us could interpret. We spent 40 years arguing about what it meant. What did you do? We made a decision so small it was almost not a decision at all, he said. It was an argument between two pilots about which star system to map first. It seemed completely irrelevant to everything. It was the hinge everything turned on. How do you know it was that specific decision? We don't entirely. We know what came before and what came after, and we know that between those two things, that was the only decision made that we did not make from fear. He turned to look at me. Every decision the council was watching us for was made from fear, he said. Trying to preserve, trying to protect, trying to keep what we had, except that one we made because a pilot named Aru was simply curious about a particular star and wanted to see it. He looked back at the ships. Curiosity, he said, they cannot model it. They try, they have been trying for 1,000,000 years. They can model aggression and they can model self-preservation and they can model cooperation and competition and every combination of the two. But curiosity, the kind that does not ask what is safe before it asks what is there, that kind cannot be modeled. He let that sit. Go back into that chamber, he said. Do not be what they are afraid of. Do not be what they are expecting. Just be what you are. He turned and walked back toward his ship without another word. I stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at our ship at Clarion's edge, with its Earth registry markings and its dented cargo door that had been dented since before I took this assignment and had never been repaired, because it still worked and there were always more pressing things. Then I went back to the chamber. I requested the floor before the elder had finished calling the session back to order. The chamber went still. Delegate Calloway, the elder said, the floor is yours. I stood, looked at 2,000 species, looked at their fear and their age and the weight of everything they had survived and everything they had watched end. You have 17 models, I said. They all agree on the outcome. None of them can tell you what the decision is. None of them can tell you who makes it or when or why. I paused. Has anyone considered that the reason you can't find the decision in your data is because it hasn't happened yet, not in the way you're looking for it? The elder watched me. Your models are built on the assumption, I said. That's significant. Decisions look significant when they happen, that the thing that changes Everything announces itself, but the pilot who changed the course of Cathani. Civilization was just curious about a star he didn't know he couldn't have known. I looked around the chamber. You can't model what we're going to do, because you're looking for an event, something large enough to put in a prediction file with a heading and a projected outcome, but that's not how it happens, not with us. I stopped. The chamber waited. What if you stopped trying to predict it, I said, and just asked us to tell you when we find it? What if instead of modeling the decision from the outside, you were in the room when we made it? What if the preparation for the chain was the thing that made the chain survivable? I sat down. Cora beside me picked up her thermos and took a long, slow drink with the expression of someone who had spent a long career in very difficult rooms and was permitting herself, just briefly, something like relief. The elder looked at me with all 17 eyes. He did not speak for a long time, and in that silence something shifted. In the chamber, not loudly, not dramatically, no one stood or cheered or made any pronouncement. But somewhere in the upper tiers, a Thune delegate turned to the one beside them and said something too low to carry, and the Haravan historian opened her case and began, for the first time in the session, to write. And Ethu, who I could not see from where I sat but knew was watching from the observation gallery, put his hands behind his back and let out a breath he had been holding for 314 years. The vote took 4 hours. Not the vote on my proposal, the vote on whether to try, whether 2,000 species, who had spent the better part of their histories building systems to understand and anticipate and manage, could make room for something that could not be managed. It was the closest vote in Council history. It passed. While the formal language was still being drafted, Patrick found me in the corridor outside the chamber with the look of someone who had made a discovery they had not been looking for. The Vreth historian found something, he said, in the Vreth records, in the very last communication they sent before the silent. She translated it this morning. What did it say? He looked at his tablet. It said they had found the answer to a question they had not known they were asking, and that the answer was too large to hold. I thought about that. What was the question? I asked. She doesn't know, the records don't say, but she thinks the question was something like, what are we? He put the tablet away. She thinks the Vreth found the answer and it destroyed them because the answer was something they could not reconcile with what they had believed themselves to be for millions of years. And for us, I said slowly. For us, he said, she thinks we have been asking that question since the beginning, and we have never once expected the answer to be comfortable. We've just kept asking anyway. He went back inside. I stood in the corridor. Sevi, the historian, walked past a moment later. She was still writing in her archive case. She glanced at me without stopping. Making a new entry? I asked. Yes, she said, not breaking stride. In the extinct section. She paused, turned. No, she said, a different section. She looked at me steadily. I am going to need a considerably larger file. She walked on. Ethu was waiting near the docking arm when I finally made my way back toward the ship. 314 years old, the kind of tired that comes from seeing enough endings to no longer be surprised by them. He stood with his hands behind his back, and watched me. Come. He did not say anything. He placed one hand on my shoulder, 7 fingers, every joint at a different angle. His hand was warm in the way very old things that are still alive are. Warm, the specific warmth of something that has not stopped yet. He held it there for a moment. Then he walked back toward his ship. Without looking back, I stood at the docking arm. Behind me, the conclave of Verith was the loudest. It had been since we arrived, not the held silence of before, something else. The sound of 2,000 species beginning, tentatively and with the considerable awkwardness of beings who had not done this before, to talk to each other about something that frightened them, which is where every important thing begins. I boarded Clarion's Edge, went to my station, opened the mission log, and typed the only line that seemed accurate. They were afraid of what we would become. Turns out so are we. We are doing it anyway. I marked it personal, saved it, closed the log. Dana was already running pre-departure checks. Cole and Priya were at their stations. Patrick was reading. Cora was refilling her thermos from the actual kettle she had apparently transported in her hard case, because she had known, with the certainty of 71 years in service, that the replicator would not be good enough. The Council's joint working group had its first meeting scheduled in 3 weeks. 17 species, no hierarchy, no predetermined outcome, just a room full of very different minds pointed at the same open question. Humanity's delegation left Council space the same way it had arrived, through the corridor of 47 ships, all of them still present, all of them watching, except this time, as Clarion's Edge passed through, one of them transmitted a single tone, old in the way things are old when they have been used without modification for a long time, the Cathani frequency, a sound their species sent, according to Patrick's immediate and slightly breathless research, to mark the beginning of a journey that was expected to matter. Then another tone, different species. Then another. By the time we cleared the outer marker, 40, one of the 47 ships had transmitted something. Not words, not language, not a message in any form the translator could decode. Just the sound of 41 civilizations deciding for the first time to say something in the direction of the species they had been afraid to face. Myra's voice came through the bridge speaker, precise and warm and genuinely curious, in the way that a very patient librarian sometimes becomes when the right book opens. Shall I log the transmissions, Delegate Calloway? Every single one, I said. I looked at the stars ahead, the same stars as always, cold, old, enormous. They looked different now. Not warmer, not closer, not less indifferent to the brief lives moving between them, just full of more questions than they had been before. That was enough. That had always been enough.